Civilian suffering in war is a persistent tragedy, yet despite legal and moral prohibitions, attacks on non-combatants remain widespread. We review and discuss two books today, Targeting Civilians in War by Alexander B. Downs and Killing Civilians, Method, Madness, and Morality in War, Hugo Slim. These are two influential books on why civilians are targeted in armed conflict. Downs explores strategic and political motivations, challenging the idea that democracies are less violent, while Slim examines moral, philosophical, and humanitarian aspects, highlighting blurred civilian identities and anti-civilian ideologies. Together, the books offer a comprehensive view of the causes and ethics behind civilian victimization in modern warfare. Let's start. Could you explain why this issue has become such a central concern in recent scholarship?
That's a crucial question. While legal frameworks like the Geneva Conventions exist, enforcement is often weak, and strategic or ideological incentives can override moral boundaries. Essentially, when commanders perceive civilian targeting as useful for victory or survival, those prohibitions break down.
So, even with centuries of moral and legal progress, the reality on the ground seems unchanged. Are there common patterns or reasons across different conflicts, or is each situation unique?
There's both variety and pattern. As both Alexander Downs and Hugo Slim argue, certain drivers like prolongation of conflict, desire to minimize one's own losses, or the blurring of civilian combatant lines appear again and again. These factors persist across time and geography, highlighting universal vulnerabilities in the civilian position.
Let's delve into Alexander Downs' Targeting Civilians in War. His research suggests democracies aren't as morally exceptional as we might assume. How does he support this counterintuitive argument?
Downs uses a mix of statistical data and historical case studies spanning nearly 2 centuries. He finds that when democracies face protracted, costly wars or aim for territorial conquest, they're just as likely as autocracies to target civilians. For example, British strategies in the Boer War or Allied bombing in WWIE show this pattern.
That challenges the idea that democratic values inherently protect civilians. Does Downs identify specific triggers that escalate violence against civilians during these conflicts?
Absolutely. He points to desperation when quick victory slips away. Leaders resort to harsher measures to break stalemates. This escalation often happens gradually. Initial restraint erodes as frustration and casualties mount. Downs also highlights that identity-based justifications, like ethnic animosity, often follow rather than precede this strategic shift.
So, in Downs' view, strategic necessity often trumps ideology or legal restraint. That's a sobering perspective. Turning to Hugo Slim's Killing Civilians, he approaches the issue from a distinctly humanitarian and ethical standpoint. Can you explain how his perspective differs from Downs'?
Certainly. Unlike Downs' structural analysis, Slim focuses on the lived experience and moral dimensions of civilian suffering. He frames civilians as a protected people, a status rooted in both ancient mercy and modern law. But he's deeply concerned with how this protection is routinely undermined in practice.
Slim also discusses the ambiguity of civilian identity. How does this ambiguity affect civilian protection in contemporary wars?
That's a key point. In many modern conflicts, economic, social, and political roles blur the lines between civilian and combatant. This makes it easier for military actors to rationalize attacks, claiming civilians are not truly uninvolved. Slim argues that unless we confront these anti-civilian ideologies head-on, legal norms alone won't suffice.
So, Slim's analysis invites us to think not just about law or strategy, but about compassion and ethical imagination amid the chaos of war. Reading Downs and Slim side by side reveals both overlap and tension in their analyses. How can policymakers or humanitarian workers practically benefit from engaging with both perspectives?
Integrating strategic analysis with ethical reflection is essential. Downs helps us predict when atrocities might occur, highlighting warning signs like stalemates and ambitious war aims. Slim, meanwhile, provides tools for advocates emphasizing the need to reinforce civilian identity and foster moral restraint even under pressure.
Could you offer a real-world example where such a blended approach might have changed outcomes for civilians?
Consider the Balkans in the 1990s. Strategic desperation led to mass displacement, but international actors who understood both the strategic incentives and the importance of maintaining civilian distinctions were better equipped to intervene through safe zones or targeted diplomacy to reduce harm.
Targeting civilians in war and killing civilians are both essential texts for anyone interested in the evolving ethics and strategies of modern warfare. Each book stands on its own as a significant contribution to the study of civilian suffering, but together they offer a powerful framework for understanding and perhaps someday preventing the horrors and atrocities that continue to define too many armed conflicts. Until next time.